Alright, YouTube, we are back. We're talking some Final Fantasy X Remake, but also potentially Final Fantasy X-3. We had this post on 4chan making the rounds today that says Final Fantasy X Remake and X-3. It will be announced for the anniversary, apparently. Expectations. Would Auron's daughter be playable? This is also shared on Twitter earlier today by Pirate Nation, which I think is maybe why it was getting a little bit of attention. And they say, new rumor that Final Fantasy X Remake and X-3 will be announced for the anniversary. Here's the thing. The possibility of a Final Fantasy X Remake has existed for a couple of years now. It's not actually a new thing. Unless a person on 4chan, who doesn't really cite a source as far as I'm aware, is talking about some other claim of this. Like, it's existed since 2023 with I'm a Hero 2. Their account on Reset Era was deleted, but they've been making the claim that there would be a Final Fantasy X Remake around the time of the Final Fantasy X anniversary, the 25th anniversary, as far back as 2023. It's not really a new leak or rumor or whatever the fuck, like, at least in terms of the idea of a X Remake happening around the time of the anniversary. Now, there was a couple follow-ups to the Final Fantasy X Remake claim that we have talked about previously on the channel. One of them was Midori, which is a whole other situation, but they had somewhat good information, right? But they claimed on Twitter, at least as of like last year, I think May of last year, that there was no Final Fantasy X Remake. So this person had said, are there any remakes from Square Enix in the works? To which they replied yes, which I believe was in reference to the 9 remake at the time. But there is not a Final Fantasy X Remake title in development. So at least according to Midori, Ryan from the Bronx, whatever the fuck you want to call the guy, from like a little over a year ago, there apparently wasn't a X Remake in development. There's also another follow-up from I'm a Hero 2 where they'd made an account on Reddit to kind of clear up some information. But they'd made a pretty big post, and part of it was covering some Square Enix shit. And they referenced the X Remake, but they also talk about some shit from Rebirth that ended up not being true. So it kind of brings into question if any of their information is true. So with the Reddit post, they had said, X Remake X-3 has a skeleton crew. It is not making its anniversary. So if we hop back to that 4chan post where it talks about the X Remake X-3, you know, something happened around the anniversary for FF10 next year, at least according to I'm a Hero 2 a handful of years ago, that was not actually happening. So when it comes to the current like leak or rumor of the X Remake thing happening with the anniversary, I don't know if the person on 4chan is working with like old information, maybe wasn't aware of the follow-up that I'm a Hero 2 did, or whatever. Again, I don't know where the person on 4chan's getting their information, if they have a source at all. It is storming like a son of a bitch outside. I don't know if you guys can hear that thunder. But that said, the problem with the follow-up that I'm a Hero 2 did is they made a claim about FF7 Rebirth, or as they refer to it, FF7R2, which is a little bit weird because I imagine around the time that they did this post on Reddit, we already had the name of FF7 Rebirth. But what they say is FF7R2 ends with a new pro tag set up for Part 3. Take your guesses what happens. And that obviously did not happen when it came to the ending of FF7 Rebirth, right? There's no clear setup for a new protagonist going into the third game. The only thing that sort of adds some weight to this, if you want to call it that, is the Zack stuff at the end where he wakes up in potentially a new world for all we know. We don't exactly know what's going on with him. It's kind of ambiguous. But even still, that's not necessarily setting up another protagonist. Also, when it comes to their claim, like they say, take a guess what happens with the new pro tag setup. But it's like, I'm not even sure what they're referencing other than like, is Cloud supposed to die at the end of Remake Part 2? Was that the claim? Or was it setting up like the Midori shit where Cloud, you know, gets sucked away in the live stream, disappears? So we'd obviously have a new protagonist with the third game. Plus of all that, it didn't happen, right? And which then brings into question their other claims with their, you know, leaks and shit, like a X Remake existing at all, or X-3, which X-3 is a different situation, which we'll talk about in a second. So like they deleted their account, you know, some time ago on Reset Era, and I don't know what the purpose is behind that. I don't even know the full track record of I'm a Hero 2, other than apparently people say they got some other Final Fantasy information correct, right? But the fact that they kind of disappeared off the face of the earth and some of their information was definitely faulty, it makes you wonder if there was ever really a X Remake at all. What are my thoughts on a X Remake? Like, I'm definitely there for it. It is my second favorite Final Fantasy of all time. I think, to a certain degree, it's more deserving than others, simply because of popularity. It is, like, I believe, the best-selling Final Fantasy game of all time. But I think that also includes, like, the HD collection with 10-2 and stuff like that, if I'm not mistaken. Something along those lines. It's either, like, number 1, number 2, or something like that, right? It's one of the best-selling Final Fantasy games, one of the most popular Final Fantasy games. And as much as I do enjoy having the capability of playing 10 on modern consoles with the HD collection thing, it's fucking horrifying. It's horrible, right? The HD character models lose a lot of their like expression and emotion, and it's become very bland and boring looking. So you could certainly argue that Final Fantasy X deserves better than that, right? A proper HD version, remaster, remake, whatever that might be, right? So I think it's definitely deserving of something along those lines. Whether or not you do a full-scale remake to the degree of something like 7 Remake, that's a whole nother conversation, really. Like, of course, part of me wants that. I'd love to see locations fleshed out like they do with Remake, but, you know, then it probably turns into a multi-part release sort of thing. I don't know that I care for that necessarily. I still buy it, of course, because it's Final Fantasy X, but part of me just kind of maybe wants that visual upgrade. But in reality, does Final Fantasy X need a remake? Not really. It's not like the HD versions are fucking unplayable or whatever, right? They're just kind of ugly to look at, especially if you've played the PS2 version, right? So, like, you could argue that it doesn't really need it. It kind of deserves it because of the shitty HD version it got, but they're still very much playable, obviously. But we also have the rumored 9 remake, and, like, realistically, it doesn't need it either, because 9 is a fantastic game. Especially with, like, the HD version that, like, 9 and 8 have, they don't technically need it. I think 8 does deserve it, because I think it could benefit immensely from a remake. I don't think 9 necessarily needs it, both visually or from, like, a gameplay perspective. I think 9 is a pretty damn good game. So very much looking forward to the potential 9 remake, of course. Third favorite Final Fantasy game, so I'm there for that shit. But it doesn't actually really need it. On to the discussion of Final Fantasy X-3, that is actually a real thing. That's something that does actually for sure exist. We've been told this by Nomura himself, that there is a script of sorts that Nojima has written. Now this came from an interview with Famitsu back in 2021. Nomura had said, if we are to make X-3, we somehow have a synopsis written by Final Fantasy X writer Kazushige Nojima. It's sleeping right now, but the plot itself does exist. Toriyama was also quoted as saying, the probability is not 0, but we are not in a phase where we can talk about it unless we have finished producing FF7 Remake. So essentially what we take from that is that they might do a X-3 at some point in the future, but it probably won't be until they finish the remake project for FF7, right? Now, that's possible that could have changed. This interview was like 4 years ago at this point, right? And they've obviously had a little bit of rocky stuff in more recent times, so it's potentially possible that they maybe have kind of fast-forwarded a bit. We're obviously not going to get it until Part 3 is out for FF7, obviously, but maybe they're already potentially working on it. The main point of this is that X-3 is not strictly a rumor. It's something that actually does, in fact, exist. Now, whether or not we ever get it is a different conversation, and what would a X-3 be? Because most likely it's going to be picking up where Final Fantasy X will end it, right? Which is a very divisive piece of media. I clearly cannot recap a 30-minute audio drama here, and to be honest, I've really only listened to this a few times in my life, so I don't necessarily remember everything that's in it. But ultimately, it's just kind of a weird continuation of the story post, like FF10 right? There's certain characters in it, like Chuami, which, like, the 4chan post mentions Orin's daughter. It's a character that thinks that they're Orin's daughter. I don't think we get a for sure clarification on that in this particular story. I'm also just personally not really a fan of how they kind of handle the Yuna and Tidus relationship. But also at the end of the story, like, Sin returns, like the big bad villain that we're trying to beat all through the first game is just kind of suddenly back. So yeah, X-3 that picks up off of the ending of Ten Will. I don't know how I feel about it. Like, I'm always there for X-3, of course. I've been waiting for X-3 for a pretty goddamn long time. I really like X-2 for what it is. It's a very not super serious game for the most part. A lot of, like, mini games and other weird kind of shit like that, right? A little quirkiness, a lot more than most Final Fantasy games have. But overall, I did like the story aspect, especially like the Tidus and Yuna stuff. But I'd still be interested in whatever a X-3 might end up being if we ever get that. Is it something that gets announced or revealed next year for the anniversary? I'm not sure, really. Again, they want to finish the remake project first, which that would be probably 2027 is what we're expecting. So they could potentially announce a X-3 next year if it's still like another year or 2 or 3 away or whatever. I wouldn't be against that idea. I think Final Fantasy X is something that they should do more with. You got to be careful with it because obviously the reception to Will was very, very mixed. And even X-2 had a mixed reception, right? Even though it is a great game. So, like, you got to be careful what you do with it. But it's kind of crazy that we got that, like, audio drama and shit, like, back with, like, the HD collection however long ago at this point, and they've really not done anything else with 10 since then. Overall, what are our thoughts on the 10 remake? I don't know how likely it is. I don't think it's going to happen, because outside of I'm a Hero 2, I don't know that anybody else really ever talks about it happening, right? Like, they were the only person as far as I'm aware. Like, I don't see other insiders ever claiming it. Not that it necessarily matters, but it also wasn't a part of the NVIDIA leak. That's not the measuring stick for everything, obviously, but we had the 9 remake, we had the Tactics Remaster there. 9 remake hasn't happened yet, but it's most likely happening at some point. But 10 remake wasn't on there. It's not one of the things, right? So, like, who knows if there's ever going to be a 10 remake. But speaking of the anniversary next year, I do hope they do something to celebrate Final Fantasy X. It's kind of annoying that they didn't celebrate 8's anniversary, right? But it'd be kind of cool since they're doing that with 9 this year if they do something with 10 next year. We also do have the anniversary for FF9 coming up very, very soon. A lot of people are hoping they announce the 9 remake sometime around there. And that's the thing, too, is I'm not sure how often they do specific things, big reveals or whatever, on anniversaries and shit, right? Like, I don't think it happens that often. We might get that with 9 this year. And if that does happen, maybe that can mean something could happen next year for FF10. Pretty much it for the video, my dudes. I'm not putting a whole lot of stock in this 4chan post. It's not really even the focus of the video necessarily. I just wanted to kind of cover the 10 remake stuff, at least that I'm aware of, and also discuss the 10-3 stuff that I'm aware of. What are your thoughts? Do you think a Final Fantasy X Remake is going to happen? But also, what are your thoughts on 10.3? Because that is something that does actually exist. But what do you want from a 10.3? Do you want them to continue the story following Final Fantasy X will? Or do you want something else? That's the video. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new. Social networks in the description below. Follow me on Twitter, @DaveYT. That's it. Bye.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Logain, or leave it like Cobain.